Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
This is the city. Los Angeles, California.
By the time the Ramones were out there having fun in the warm California sun in 1976, the rumblings of a homegrown underground scene were already taking place on the left coast. The Weirdos and the Screamers had been around since '75, and when the Damned arrived in the Golden State in '77, they fit right in with the eccentric LA scene. Not as dangerous as the Sex Pistols and not as safe as the Ramones, the vampiric Dave Vanian, the goofy and often naked Captain Sensible, the wild Rat Scabies, and the understated Brian James toyed with their audiences and hardly ever took anything too seriously. Before their first gig in LA, the Damned made an appearance at Greg Shaw's Bomp record store, drawing nearly the entire greater Los Angeles punk scene. Scenester Pleasant Gaiman says the promotional appearance was the first time many of the punks had seen each other in the daylight. Members of the Weirdos, the Bags, X, the Go-Go's, the Nerves, the Zeros, and the Germs emerged from the darkness of their underground scene. The Germs frontman, who was at the time known as Bobby Pinn, timidly approached John Denny of the Weirdos, who were slated to play the Orpheum Theater that night. Pinn asked if his band could play the opening set. Recognizing a band potentially worse than their own, the Weirdos okayed the debut of the Germs, and hardcore was born. Well, almost. After about 10 minutes of incomprehensible shouting and condiment smearing, it was clear this band had nothing, but at the same time, they had something. Bobby Pinn later changed his name to Darby Crash, signaling a shift in their music and in the subcultural zeitgeist. The Germ sound was far removed from the accessible power pop of the Ramones or Buzzcocks, louder, darker, more raw, more literate, and less structured, with drug-fueled performances that would make Jim Morrison shake his head. The Germs, in 1977, laid the foundation for a new scene. X's John Doe says the Germs' music was dark, much darker than the other bands. Bad Religion's Brett Gurewitz says the Germs felt more dangerous. Author Jim Rulin says their music wasn't accessible, but the frontman was. Gurewitz met Crash at a USC frat party in November 1980. This was one of Bad Religion's first gigs, opening for the Circle Jerks. Gurewitz asked the Germs frontman why his singing was purposely unintelligible.
Brett. Hey, Darby. Darby. Hey. Brett. Can I ask you a question? Darby. Sure. Brett. When you play live, why don't you sing the words? Darby. Because I can't remember them.
2.5 weeks later, Crash died of an intentional heroin overdose. Bad Religion had just played their second show, and their next was a week away. Where the Germs laid the foundation for LA's second wave, Bad Religion got in on the groundswell that began the third. Hi everybody, Brendan here with another edition of This Month in Punk Rock History. It's January 2024, and this month in punk rock history, we take a look at Bad Religion's first full-length album, How Could Hell Be Any Worse, which was released on January 12, 1982. But first...
Greetings! 2023 was a pretty good year for us. With your help, we were able to reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Well, it's a new year, so we have a new goal. 25 by 25. That's right, 2,500 subscribers by the year 2025. How do we plan to do that? Well, we got the return of Greetings from the Underground. First steps about a punk rock club called Sleigh Run, where I caught up with the lead singer of The Ritualists. Plus, we got some really great, interesting stories coming up this year with This Month in Punk Rock History. You're going to want to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Now back to the punk.
At roughly 6 years old, the musical genre known as punk had already undergone several identity crises. The Sex Pistols collapsed in '78, signaling the death of the first wave. Just over a year later, the Ramones began working with Phil Spector on their fifth album. Even in the insular Los Angeles scene, a metamorphosis was taking place in 1980. Brendan Mullen's illegal basement club The Mask and its Santa Monica Boulevard successor Other Mask had been shuttered for good, and Mullen had taken to booking more established acts at Club Lingerie on Hollywood Boulevard. Meanwhile, newer, still underground hardcore bands booked Elks Lodges, Moose Lodges, and American Legion halls. In Mullen's biography of Germs frontman Darby Crash, the promoter says that by 1980, female attendance of punk shows had plummeted, and the peculiar and eclectic Hollywood scene that once hosted The Damned had given way to the greater Los Angeles scene. Gone were the days of the Avengers, the Germs, and the Alley Cats. The Go-Go's were in England negotiating with Stiff Records over their first single while touring with Madness. The ladies had left the scene. Black Flag's third bassist, Kira Rossler, who was at the time a member of the group Twisted Roots, says Black Flag, who formed in '79, were always, quote, a hard-driving boy band. And as much as the Germs are credited with ushering in a new wave, Black Flag created the template. Early in '79, Black Flag played their first proper show at a Moose Lodge in Redondo Beach. Frontman Keith Morris estimates a couple of hundred people were in attendance, including KROQ DJ Rodney Bingenheimer and Dead Boys frontman Stiv Bators. Keith Morris claims the DJ was, quote, blown away by the Moose Lodge show, and soon gave Black Flag airtime.
Just a quick sidebar here.
Bingenheimer was the American answer to John Peel, a kingmaker and perennial cheerleader for alternative music. Bingenheimer championed bands like the Runaways, Van Halen, the Ramones, and Blondie. His on-air phone call with Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious broke the news in the U.S. of Glenn Matlock's firing.
They can't fire me, I quit!
The so-called mayor of Sunset Strip was known to hold court at Denny's every day, and in the pre-punk era, he operated a glam rock club called the English Disco. Between 1980 and '82, he put out 3 compilations on Posh Boy Records. These feature some of the earliest recordings of bands like JFA, The Bangles, Minutemen, Social Distortion, Agent Orange, Black Flag, The Circle Jerks, and The Adolescents. For many kids, especially in the suburbs, Rodney and the Rock offered their first taste of independent punk music. For Bad Religion, it was their first big break. But we're not there yet. Hold on.
We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
In the summer of '79, Black Flag played a free show at Pollywog Park in Manhattan Beach. It was one of those I Was There shows where everyone in the audience went on to start a band. Bingenheimer wasn't at this one, but among the angry suburban families who expected something more in line with the Marine Corps brass band were the McDonald brothers, who would go on to form Red Cross. Jeffrey Lee Pierce, who would go on to form Gun Club, was there with Diane Chai, founder of the Alley Cats. Photographer and pre-Black Flag bassist Glenn Spot Lockett captured Ron Reyes and Des Cadena, both future frontmen for Black Flag, wrestling in the dirt. And standing right in front was Jay Bentley, founding bassist for Bad Religion. Black Flag's demanding rehearsal schedule began to hinder Morris's partying, and by the end of the year, he left the band and formed the Circle Jerks with guitarist Greg Hetson, who had just left Red Cross, and drummer Lucky Lehrer, who had failed his audition for Red Cross because he was too good. Later, a random encounter filled the bassist slot with the inadvertent poaching of Angry Samoans bassist Roger Rogerson. If Black Flag came along at the tail end of the second wave of LA punk, says Morris, then the Circle Jerks were at the front of the next wave of hardcore bands from LA and Orange County. Greg Graffin, who describes himself on the Turned Out a Punk podcast as a lonely teenager, had discovered Rodney on the Rock and enjoyed the music, but at first had little interest in the scene.
So it really, radio and the music got me sort of focused on punk music, but I was by no means part of the scene. And around 1980, I finally decided I want to be part of this thing.
It wasn't until he was dumped by a girlfriend that Graffin decided to cut and dye his hair as an act of teenage rebellion and join the local punk scene, if he could find it.
And then I met Jay Bentley, and we had a couple other friends.
When Jay Bentley returned to El Camino Real High School after spending the summer in Manhattan Beach where he saw Black Flag, his hair was also cut short, and he sported a t-shirt that read, Virgin. He ran into Graffin, an acquaintance since middle school. He noticed Graffin's Black Flag t-shirt. Author Jim Ruland quotes the future bassist as saying, I guess we're it. The 2 sophomores thought they were the only kids in their school who were into punk. They had yet to meet 2 juniors who would soon change their lives. Jay Ziskrout had been drumming since 7th grade and had been in 2 bands with Brett Gurewitz, neither of which was close to a punk band. One of them, according to Ruland, never made it out of the living room, and the other got as far as a school talent show.
My ding-a-ling, I want you to play with my ding-a-ling.
This act is over.
Gurewitz tells podcaster Toby Morse that by the late 70s, LA's punk scene still had not really made it to the suburbs.
We're going underground to a place you've only heard about. Once through that door, we'll have left Los Angeles and entered the world of punk.
He was turned on to the music by the clerk at his local indie record shop, who encouraged the teen to check out the Ramones' first album.
Yeah, I was only 15 years old in '77, but I wasn't aware of it. It seems like some coffee table books with pictures of punks in England. I knew there was something happening. And then I got turned on to the Ramones I think, in like 78. And then the guy in the store said, hey, yeah, I said, what's cool, blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, you got to check out this Ramones record. Yeah, so I took it home, and that was it. It was hook, line, and sinker.
You think that's one of the bands that inspired you to start a band?
They are the band that inspired me. No question, yeah.
When a mutual friend introduced Graffin to Gurewitz, the two hit it off immediately.
Wonder Twin powers, activate!
Graffin had always wanted to be in a band, and Gurewitz already had been. Within a week, writes Graffin, Brett and I were writing and singing songs together as guitarist and singer. The duo recruited Brett's friend Ziskra to drum. They recorded their first practice using a boombox, and upon playback decided there was something lacking. Graffin recruited the only punk in school who wasn't already in the band. According to Ruland, there wasn't much discussion.
Greg, you're going to play in our band. Jay, okay, I have a guitar. Greg, we already have a guitar player. You're going to play bass. Jay, okay, I don't have a bass. Greg, here are some songs we wrote. Can you find a bass? Jay, oh, fuck. Okay.
They soon landed on an attention-grabbing name and a logo to replace the Nazi swastika so commonly worn in punk's primordial era. The logo would come to be called Crossbuster, and it reinforced the name. They had a complete band, they had original songs, they had a name, and even a logo. With a handful of regulars stopping by the rehearsals in the Graffin family garage, they had what could generously be called a following. The next step in the natural progression of a punk band is to book some gigs, right? Now, with only about 10 minutes worth of music, they didn't have enough to fill a full set, so they skipped that step and went right into the studio to cut a demo. The demo proved to be a useful tool for troubleshooting and refining their sound, but also for boosting their profile. As the El Camino Real contingent went off in search of a punk scene, they inevitably found their way to the de facto headquarters of Los Angeles punk, Okie Dog. Before there was Facebook, before there was email, there was Okie Dog, described by Slash Magazine's Fast Freddy as, quote, a well-lit hamburger stand on the corner of Gardner and Santa Monica Boulevard. The list of local punk celebrity regulars is miles long, but the most relevant to our story were the Circle Jerks. Greg Hetson and Lucky Lehrer befriended the scene's newest members, and when the Circle Jerks made an appearance on Rodney on the Rock, they brought with them the Bad Religion demo. Reading the label on the tape for the first time live on air, Rodney introduced the band as Bad Relgion and played the tape. Graffin says the band made it into weekly rotation, and Greg Hetson started making guest appearances at Bad Religion gigs. With the demo in circulation and receiving regular airtime, Bad Religion booked their first show. On Tuesday, November 11, 1980, the four friends and about 40 fans arrived at Joey Kill's bar in Burbank to open for the Forms, Johnny X, and the Names. At around 11 p.m., it was clear that no one was coming to open the doors, and they all went home. Rather than making their debut at an obscure bar in the media capital of the world, opening for a bunch of long-forgotten bands, they instead made their debut at an obscure warehouse in Orange County at a birthday party opening for the then relatively unknown Social Distortion. Their roughly 15-minute set consisted of their entire 6 or 8 song catalog, played twice. Of that first show, Graffin said, quote, ultimately, I consider it a success because we didn't get beaten up and nobody threw their shoes at us. And Bentley said, quote, I threw up before we played, but I played. This was followed by the aforementioned USC show opening for Circle Jerks at a punk-themed frat party at which Gurewitz learned why you should never meet your heroes. Ruland's book calls the meeting with Darby Crash, Gurewitz' lyricist hero, disappointing. Still, they pressed on. In 1981, they revised and expanded their demo as their first commercial release. The self-titled debut EP was financed with a little help from Brett's dad, who was credited as a producer. The record had an initial pressing of 500 copies, which had some sort of skipping error on the master. This was fixed for the second run of 1,500 copies. Etched in the runout was the message, "We are not Bad Religion, you are." Bear in mind, this is a record put out by 4 high school kids who knew basically nothing about the music business. They did everything themselves because they lacked the knowledge or resources to avail themselves of the existing music industry infrastructure. The release was a DIY effort out of necessity. They booked the studio, they recorded and produced the record, they brought it to the pressing plant, they designed and assembled the sleeve, and they brought copies to various independent record stores throughout greater Los Angeles.
You look familiar. Do I know you?
Though Ruland's book seems to imply they never considered shopping the record to existing labels, Bentley tells Turned Out a Punk podcast that they were rejected by several labels. Whatever the case, the self-titled EP was not only the debut of Bad Religion, it was the debut of their own record label, Epitaph Records. Epitaph catalog JBG 1072. Continuing with the DIY ethic, boxes of records were brought to independent record stores throughout Los Angeles and sold on consignment. When they returned to the shops to collect, the shops asked for more. After the release of our EP, writes Graffin, we acquired a significant fan base. Punk rockers from the San Fernando Valley, although dispersed in small clusters, began to take notice along with some clusters of Hollywood scenesters who were friends. It wasn't long before they started playing bigger shows with slightly bigger bands. Adolescence, TSOL, Social Distortion, and they landed their first gigs outside the city, first in Tarzana, a sort of homecoming to the valley, and later in San Francisco. On July 4th, 1981, they opened for the Alley Cats and the Dickies at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Hollywood. It was their first big club show. Here, they debuted Fuck Armageddon, This Is Hell, Latchkey Kids, New Leaf, Part 3, and We're Only Gonna Die. Graffin's vocals were temporarily interrupted when one overzealous fan ran into the mic, causing it to crash into Graffin's face and cut the singer's lip before stage diving back into obscurity. Graffin angrily grabbed the mic stand and jabbed at the audience, striking the wrong guy. This was the second of only 3 shows Bad Religion played that summer, as Graffin still spent his summers in Wisconsin with his father.
Hello, Wisconsin!
Meanwhile, back at Epitaph headquarters, letters were pouring in from all across Europe. Gurewitz, who was the lead for all things Epitaph, was a bit perplexed, but assumed that these were fan letters written in Italian, Spanish, German, and Dutch, sometimes accompanied by fanzine clippings. By the time of Graffin's return to the San Fernando Valley, the band was already planning their next release, a full-length record. It was around this time, according to Rulin, that one of the buyers from Gurewitz's favorite record shop called. The men had left the store to work for distributor Gem Records, who offered to advance the group $15,000 for exclusive distribution rights to their new LP. So into the studio they went. But let's back up just a second. After walking out of the tiny garage-based real-life studio in Agora Hills, where their first EP was recorded, they headed over to the Hollywood-based Gold Star Studios, home to Phil Spector's famous Wall of Sound technique and countless legendary recordings, including the Ramones' Leave Home. There they were met by a purple-haired receptionist named Jeanette Napolitano, who, upon hearing the recording, said they should have her boyfriend produce the next record. So when it came time to record their LP, Gurewitz reached out to Napolitano's boyfriend, Jim Mankey. With the profits from the first EP, the Gem advance, and another loan from Gurewitz's dad, the band booked the overnight slot at Track Records on Santa Monica Boulevard. Halfway through recording, they ran out of money. They had to put the record on the shelf until they earned enough to come back and finish. During the recording break, Graffin, Bentley, and Gurewitz were hanging out one day at the Gurewitz home when proofs arrived in the mail of the photographs they had commissioned Edward Culver to take for the album cover. Culver was well known among the LA punks, having had his work featured on albums by the Circle Jerks, TSOL, and later Black Flag, among many others. The 3 friends landed on a cityscape shot from the Hollywood Cross in the Cauega Hills above the Hollywood Freeway as the cover photo. Either Graffin or Gurewitz informed Ziskrout of the decision, and by the time Bentley got home, an outraged Ziskrout called.
Ziskrout, I heard you guys looked at pictures without me. Jay, yeah, so what? Ziskrout, fuck you guys, I quit.
It was a decision he called, with the benefit of hindsight, childish. Bad Religion suddenly found themselves with an unfinished LP and no drummer. Enter Pete Finestone. Finestone was a friend of Graffin's and Ziskrout's and acted as Ziskrout's roadie and drum tech. Also from the Valley, he and Graffin would often attend punk shows together at the Starwood and hang out at Okie Dog afterwards with the rest of the band and the whole Hollywood scene. In a 1997 interview, Graffin told Goldmine magazine that Finestone, quote, practically forced himself on the band, knocking on Graffin's door one day and offering his services as drummer. Finestone himself writes, quote, after Jay Ziskrout got canned, they asked me to take over the throne. Graffin's books and the Rulin book are vague on the transition, but the fact remains Ziskrout was out and Finestone was in, and Bad Religion was able to re-enter the studio after about 2 months to finish their record. Their second round of studio time took only 1 weekend and attracted visits from the Adolescents, Lucky Lehrer, and Lehrer's brother Chet, who played guitar in Wasted Youth. Also making an appearance was Greg Hetson, who provided a guitar solo for the Bentley Penn track Part 3. Jeanette Napolitano also showed up every day, presumably to hang out with her boyfriend, as well as check out the band. With EP sales better than they could have imagined, and interest in an LP before studio time was even booked, they decided to press 6,000 copies, half of which would go to Gem for distribution. The rest was for DIY distribution. And so, the entire Epitaph Records staff, all 4 of them, split their time between Gurowitz's house and Graffin's house, where they stuffed the records into the sleeves, sometimes signing them or including little notes in order to break up the monotony. And on January 12, 1982, Epitaph Records catalog BRLP1, Bad Religion's How Could Hell Be Any Worse, hit stores. Right away, the punk zines loved the album. Urban Waste calls it, quote, the best hardcore album and band in its 81 to 83 generation. Crash Off Key listed among its favorite albums, and Flipside Fanzine says it's, quote, one hell of a good album. This is LA's best release in a while. Even the mainstream Billboard magazine kind of praises the lyricism, saying, quote, it's clear this LA band has more on its mind than just cruising for burgers. The first run eventually sold 12,000 records, and things were looking up for Bad Religion. At the time, Epitaph was not really thought of as a serious label. We had our name on there, we had a mailbox. That was it, Gurewitz told Billboard in 1993. But because of its equal partnership model, the band members decided to have an outside third party co-sign all the checks. That third party was Gurowitz's dad. A successful entrepreneur, the elder Gurewitz was well-liked and trusted by the band. As Epitaph's account began to swell, so did the younger Gurowitz's drug addiction. I didn't realize, Bentley says, that Brett would just say, here, sign this check, I've got to get money to this guy. And his dad would do it, and then Brett would go out and get drugs with it. As fast as the money came in for record sales, it went out for drug purchases.
I would like to buy some cocaine, please.
With only one EP and one LP, Bad Religion was far from a full-time job, and Epitaph, as I said, was far from a full-time label. Gurewitz worked for independent label Chameleon Records at that time, and, behind the backs of his bandmates, he commissioned another pressing and licensed the distribution to his employer. There was no accounting for any of the money. The band wouldn't get their record back until 1986. Graffin says this caused, quote, a little bit of controversy among the band, but that they didn't want to fight about it. You just kind of go, whatever. They may not have made any money on the record, but it strengthened their fan base, and they continued to play throughout greater Los Angeles, with occasional trips to the Bay Area and once to Sacramento. They had 2 local television appearances under their belt, and Gurewitz sang backup on the first Epitaph release by a band other than Bad Religion. In October, Epitaph put out the Vandals' Peace Through Vandalism, but according to Gurewitz, the Vandals never got paid for it because he didn't know what he was doing and didn't account for royalties. Years later, Gurewitz offered to make amends by returning the masters to the group. That fall, Graffin enrolled in Cal State, bought a synthesizer, and began to experiment with a sort of post-punk sound. In 1983, Bad Religion put out their second LP, Into the Unknown, an album inspired by Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer more than it was by The Clash and the Ramones. The album was a disaster. Bentley walked out after recording only one track. Producer Tom Wilson questioned whether Feinstein was up to the task of the elaborate drumming needed for such grandiose work, and he was soon fired. Upon its release, Into the Unknown was nearly universally panned by the punk community, which was leaning in a heavier, faster direction.
To give official numbers, we shipped 10,000. I think we had 11,000 returns. I don't know how that happens.
Maximum Rock and Roll flat out said it, quote, totally sucks. To date, it remains the only Bad Religion album never to be re-released on its own, and Gurewitz remains reluctant to even acknowledge it.
Into the Unknown. What kind of album was that? Heavy drug abuse, or...?
The album did so poorly, it bankrupted Epitaph. By the time the album dropped, Graffin had transferred to the University of Wisconsin, and the band essentially went defunct for the first time. So that's it for our look at Bad Religion's first LP. Corrections, comments, insights, and info always welcome. And join me next month when...
The reader, sir. It appears to be... jammed. Raspberry.
Until then, dig through my archives at tiprh.start.page. And find me on TikTok. For this month in punk rock history, I'm Brendan McCabe.
The guy from Bad Religion got his master's in geology from UCLA, and he's working on his PhD in evolutionary biology at Cornell.